And so I'd like us to start just by brainstorming a little bit. Let me, in the chat, here's the link. Try this link. I should be able to see you come on board. And if you're able to get in, please, in one of the spaces, write down a word that you think about, a word or a concept when you think about community philanthropy, and just use one. If you cannot get onto this page, don't worry. You can also do this in the chat. So some people are able to, we have a couple different people on the same one. If you see a different color cursor, maybe go to a different box. There we go. What's a word that you think about when you think of community philanthropy? And please write in the language that you're most comfortable with in the chat or on the document. What we're finding is that community philanthropy means different things to different people and in different regions of the world. And so I think this will be a very rich conversation today, just to hear the perspectives of other people. We have the word local, local, co-inversión is co-investment, alliances, collaboration, sustainability, co-responsibility or sharing responsibility, being responsive, lifting voices or levantar las voces, bridges, good, for all. Good. Any other ideas? What are other words that you're thinking about when you hear community philanthropy? You can also write in the chat if you like. Transformation, okay, social change, resources, good, empowered. And there's really not just one definition, right? It's what we're making it out to be, but there are studies around this. And that's one reason why we invited Nick from the Mott Foundation, because they've really delved into what their meaning is for this and how it drives their grant making. Reciprocity, okay. Doing processes beginning at a local level. Equity, excellent. Excellent, thank you. Okay, we will leave it at this for now. And this is very helpful for us at Connecting Communities in the Americas, also just to understand where you all are coming from and how we can further this conversation. So we'll be saving this and we'll share it with you in an email that follows today's session. I'd like to continue now by introducing Nick. Nick has been a colleague of mine for several years now, a bit distanced in earlier years, and now we work quite closely together. The Charles Stewart Mott Foundation is one of the primary funders of Connecting Communities in the Americas. And so I was really thrilled that Nick was able to take the time to share with us today. I'd like to read just a quick introduction to him. I'm going to read this in Spanish. So if you don't understand Spanish, again, you can go to your screen and click on interpretation and then choose English so that you can get the interpretation in English. Nick Dechakiewski es coordinador principal de programas en la Fundación Mott y trabaja en dos áreas de la sociedad civil, el crecimiento de la filantropía comunitaria y el fortalecimiento del espacio cívico. En los años 90 y previo a iniciar en la Fundación Mott en 2000, Nick se mudó a Ucrania para apoyar a las reformas democráticas y económicas del nuevo país. Luego, y trabajando ya para la fundación en su oficina anterior en Praga, Nick supervisaba las subvenciones en Rusia, Ucrania, Bielorrusia y Moldavia hasta el año 2006. Después fue encargado de la concesión de subvenciones para la infraestructura del sector filantrópico y la filantropía comunitaria. Desde el 2016, Nick ha sido miembro del Consejo Directivo de United Philanthropy Forum y de Conectando Comunidades en América, antes conocido como BBCA. Nick tiene maestrías en la Administración de Negocios de la Universidad de Colombia y más adelante en la Dirección Coral. Le encantan los equipos de deportes en su ciudad nativa de Cleveland y disfruta escribir arreglos en música folclórica ucraniana, tocar la bandura, que es un instrumento ucraniano, leer novelas de la ciencia ficción y montar en bicicleta. Habla ucraniano y el español. Es un gran persona, gran amigo también a CCA. Entonces me da mucho gusto presentarte, Nick. Thank you. Go ahead, Nick.
Yes, but that was very gracious, Lisa. I really appreciate the introduction. And I'm thrilled to spend some time with a lot of people that I've not seen or met, that we'll have a little bit of time, but we certainly very much hope that we will all have the possibility to meet in person, and that everybody makes it through this pandemic healthy and we'll be able to get together again, not just virtually. As Lisa mentioned, I've been working in this area of community foundations and community philanthropy support for quite some time. I've been at the Mott Foundation, as you heard, for over 20 years now, and most of that time have been working on community foundations as a part of the Mott Foundation strategy to support civil society in many countries around the world. Often this, what I found along that journey is that the idea of community philanthropy and community foundations would be conflated, would simply be used interchangeably. In fact, sometimes I make that mistake and often do. But over the years, and with a lot of help from many wise people, great practitioners and observers, in fact, at the Global Fund for Community Foundations, and I know we'll be delving into more of some of their material later on in this seminar. I've come to the understanding that community philanthropy is actually a broader concept, and has a different approach to it than a community foundation. So let me share my screen and delve into that a little bit. Now, you will be seeing what's on the screen in Spanish, but you'll be hearing me talking about it in English. So those of you who aren't good Spanish speakers, it'll give you a little opportunity to learn a little bit, okay? So first of all, and this comes from some of the work done by Dana Doan, who was at the Indiana University, and Jenny Hodgson from the Global Fund for Community Philanthropy. And they talk about community philanthropy being a force or a form of locally driven development. Now, it is accompanied with various values, which you can read: reciprocity, solidarity, social cohesion, interdependence, and self-reliance. but it also, there are very related concepts that are very close to it. For example, grassroots philanthropy or participatory philanthropy, horizontal philanthropy, social justice philanthropy, or simply place-based philanthropy. Now, let me go back a step to say that, if we look at the definition of community, the one that I found that is the simplest is that it is a social unit that has something in common. And generally, there are four, at least, there may be others, main types of communities. One is a community of place, another of identity, third of interest or particular issue, and the fourth is a community of practice. All of these are important, all of these are valid. Most people belong to several communities at the same time, if not all, okay? Now, I won't get into why, but the history of the Mott Foundation is such that we focus on communities of place. And once again, I will emphasize that that does not mean that any other kinds of communities are any less important or valid. It's simply the one that comes out of our history from the values that our founder held. And in fact, we as a foundation adhere to that, given that over half of our yearly grant making goes to our own home community of Flint, Michigan, of the city where we live in. I might add that there is one, I think, uniqueness to communities of place that is a little different from the others. And that is because that is where people simply have to physically coexist. And that leads to certain issues that they really essentially have to solve if they're going to, mutually survive. So be that as it may, I just want to point that out and then talk about the kind of basic definition that I see for the simplest way that I can describe community philanthropy as we look at it for the Mott Foundation is local resources for local needs. And that word local implies a place, right? Again, this is for us, that's how we see it. Now, there are many different institutional forms of community philanthropy, okay? That some are quite common. Of course, the one that we, the Mott Foundation, are the most kind of familiar with and have supported for more than half a century now is the Community Foundation. But there are other types. There are United Ways, there are giving circles, there are social venture partners. There are, I should have mentioned, youth banks. I see Vernon on the call, volunteer centers, and others. Now, what are some of the attributes for the Mott Foundation of what community foundations are? A nonprofit charitable institution that is legally registered, that it's available to serve all residents within a defined geographic area. It's governed by members of that community. It's independent of any particular religious group or political affiliation or business interest or family or individual or of government. So it's the stakeholders are dispersed, are diverse and dispersed. It's permanent and it has long-term goals and a strategy for sustainability. And it relies mainly on a broad array of local resources, both financial and otherwise. And you could probably understand that that feeds into its independence when it's not relying simply on one particular or very few sources of income or of resources. What it does, it promotes long-term positive change in a community. It brings together various sectors to work together to solve common problems, and it promotes social cohesion, equity, and civic participation. How does it do this? And that there's a lot of variety here because community foundations from different places have different emphases and operate differently. But it builds and secures, distributes, manages, and invests resources, both financial and other, to advance the community's well-being. It invests in a broad range of resources and issues as defined by the community, provides funds to local groups, typically through grants, to address a range of local needs. In other words, it doesn't try to do everything itself. It actually empowers others and builds the capacity of others in the community. And some call that building civic capacity. That's another nice. Hola, chico. And finally, it stewards resources in a manner that is transparent and fully accountable to the community. So I'll just summarize very quickly by saying again, for the Mott Foundation, we don't pretend to have the final definition for what a community foundation is, but what it is not, and probably somebody needs to mute if they're not speaking. En español, por favor.
José, ¿puedes apagar tu micrófono?
Okay, sorry. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sorry.
Sí, está bien.
Okay, gracias. So for us, again, with a community foundation is not a single cause organization or campaign or movement. Neither is it just an internet-based giving platform. These are not branches of national or international organizations. These aren't direct social service agencies, nor organizations that rely on a single funding source, or organizations that rely solely on funding from outside the community. For us, it is critically important that it is rooted in local resources. So these are some of the concepts accompanying what a community foundation is. And I will stress again for the Mott Foundation, because we recognize they will be different in different places. But within all that, we certainly feel that it's critical that they are rooted in the ideals that surround community philanthropy. So maybe with that, I'll turn it back to you, Lisa, to delve into that, or at any point, whenever you feel it's appropriate for me to answer any questions, I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. I think what I'd like us to do first is to get into breakout rooms so that we can talk to each other a little bit. We have done our best to divide you into breakout rooms by language. So about a third of our participants speak Spanish only, about a third speak English only, and then about a third are bilingual. And so when you get into your breakout room, please be very intentional about choosing the language that everybody in your room can speak. This is part of this equity piece, right? We want language equity as well. And we do recognize Corinne, and I'm not sure if Mariana is here from Brazil, but that we are working towards involving Portuguese as well. Keo speaks Portuguese as well. Roberto, I think, was coming today. So here is the question. Where does your organization fit in with this concept so far that Nick has talked about with community philanthropy? You may be a community foundation, or you might be some sort of other type of organization. Is there some sort of a relationship to community philanthropy that your organization has? So this is going to give you an opportunity to say hello, introduce yourself, and what your organization is. And then how does it tie to this concept of community philanthropy? We'll have about 15 minutes. And when we come back, I'm going to share with you a little bit more deeply into some of the research around community philanthropy, especially that the Global Fund for Community Foundations has done. And this idea of basing our philanthropy in community as well, because even as community foundations, it doesn't automatically mean that we're involving all of our communities in our philanthropy, right? And in how we're operating. So in 15 minutes, this is your question. Keep a note of it because I'm going to exit the screen. Just where do you fit in? Where does your organization fit in with this concept so far of community philanthropy? Good. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, we're going to continue right along. Talking a little bit about community philanthropy as it was, but has it's been presented by the Global Fund for Community Foundations. And I'd like to begin with this. We are going to use the chat for this part. So just spend a couple of minutes, look at this picture. This is kind of their concept of community philanthropy. And write just one thing in the chat, what is happening in this picture? What, in order to draw out some of the elements of community philanthropy, and try to put something that nobody else has caught, because there's a lot going on in this picture. And you can be very specific. You can say there are two people doing this, or there's a group of people doing this. Try to be very specific. Where are they? What are they doing? Who is there? What is happening? So looking at some of these concepts, one could actually kind of put together a definition, right? Or a partial definition. Community philanthropy is where people work in harmony, celebrate together, collaborate, everybody's involved. There's a common pot of resources that they're growing together. They're communicating, they're integrated. Local resources come together and grow and produce fruit from that. There's mutual support, support between each other. They're finding ways to bring people together. When we involve everybody, we can put these local resources together as community. They're a community that is learning to grow together, and they're celebrating. Their hands are up. Yeah. Group of people united around local resources to act together. And there are different groups with specific actions, right? But it seems to be contributing to a whole. They're making bridges. The hammocks could be read as representing care for the community, a place to rest and restore. We know we need that, don't we, in our work? Using technology to lift up resources up to the top on the right. Good. There's a house on the tree, so thinking outside of the box, different solutions and possibilities together. All the resources form a single canopy that blends together. Very nice. There's food for everybody in this community pot. There's not only one skill, but everyone working together with their various skills. Very good. Okay. Well, this picture, this image is actually on one of the documents that was co-written by the Global Fund for Community Foundations. And it might be something really interesting to do actually with your team at work, to study it together. And what does this mean for our organization? And how can we move even closer toward this type of work? Community philanthropy based on the premise that all communities have their own assets, money, skills, knowledge, networks. When these are pooled together, they build community power and voice. And that, of course, is what a community foundation does as well. We are place-based, we are local, we're serving the communities of a region. I think what our challenge is today is perhaps, are we including all of our communities? And we're learning so much about that right now in connecting communities in the Americas and in life in general. And so part of the concept of community philanthropy involves these 5 concepts. So really beginning with local assets. What are the resources that a local community already has? Not just money, but expertise, knowledge, experience, knowing how to get things done. And this is one of the primary obstacles of external donors, is that they don't know how things are done locally. And so it is our responsibility to be able to educate any external donors that we have, and sometimes even local donors, of how to get things done in a way that work. And the more that we recognize community assets, the more the power and the voice is given to the community members themselves. The second concept is co-investors. And we had a very, very interesting conversation back in July in peer resource sharing about talking about donors versus co-investors. And so if somebody is giving money, like, who do we think about when we think of a donor? And who do we think about when we think of co-investors? And could talking about co-investors help us to bring this horizontal relationship between people who are giving money and those who are using the money on a local basis? Can everyday community members, families, children, marginalized groups, can they also be co-investors? And so how can we start to reimagine community development, not with donors and beneficiaries, but that we are all co-investors, we are all donors, we are all philanthropists. I know one of the big things I learned from my colleagues in Mexico when I was directing the community foundation there was people were shying away from the word philanthropy. Philanthropy was almost like a dirty word, right? Why? Well, because it's connected to power and it's connected to patronism, right? And so what does it mean? How are we using this word philanthropy in a way that makes everyone's contribution equally valuable? So that's the concept of co-investors. The third one is ownership and sustainability. I'm sure that many of us have this experience with who are we involving in creating a benefit in the community. When I was teaching in Mexico, we had a program to support public schools and to help them grow their libraries. And in one particular elementary school, I had my high school students there. We went in and we painted a storeroom with really bright colors, and we bought shelving, and we bought them books, and we painted the library, school library sign. And for my high school students, it was such a meaningful project. They loved that project. It was for the local school. Everybody seemed excited. We went back 3 months later to do a reading activity with the kids. And when we walked through the gate of the school, several of the first graders ran up to us and said, "Ah, you're here. Finally, we can use your library." And we thought, what? It's not our library, it's your library. Yes, but they weren't invited. They weren't invited to have their own concept of what they wanted as a library. They weren't invited to paint. They weren't invited to take part or even to take charge of this, right? And so how can we help to create a sense of ownership? And in fact, local communities know what they need. They know where to go. They know how to do it. And the more that local communities are in charge of their own change, the longer it will last. And yes, maybe we all need a bit of support or facilitation, but what role should your organization play in that? Horizontal relationships, we've talked about that a little bit already, and trust and transparency. I've heard it said several times, we can only move at the speed of trust. I'm sure you might have heard that. Trust building is a foundation for anything that we do with community together. And so community philanthropy, this is a way to look at it just as far as what different aspects we believe it should have. And can we measure these? Like, can we assess where our own organization is in each of these areas and what the areas of opportunity are? In the corner here, we have the Cherokee Preservation Foundation, and I really loved this example of community philanthropy. And you can look it up, the Cherokee Nation here in the United States. They have a casino that they own and operate in the United States, and they decided to set up a foundation so that the earnings that they got from the casino would then be given back to the community in the form of grants. And they also use participatory grant making so that the community is deciding what money is available, making sure it's very transparent, what are the different projects it could be used for, and where are the priorities of our own community. So I thought that was a really excellent example of what community philanthropy looks like. That's not a community foundation. This is something else that the Global Fund for Community Foundations talks about as far as organizations, community philanthropy organizations. So like Nick mentioned, community foundations are one way of operating community philanthropy, but there are many others as well. Important is that they are really elevating, focusing on the local assets, building trust, and building capacity in their regions. And so the purpose of the foundation, of a community foundation, or of a women's fund, or an environmental fund, or of a giving circle, are to learn more about the local assets, to find them and use them, to build trust with local people, right? To be able to work together, and then to build capacity as it is needed, and allowing community to define what the capacity is that they need to have in order to move forward and not to do it for them. Another concept with community philanthropy is in what is the process? What do we do as community philanthropists? We invest in relationships. How can we build trust and relationships across sectors, for example, with businesses, with governments, with other nonprofits? How can we build knowledge and spread knowledge around, share knowledge? How can we support infrastructure that community has defined and involve community in infrastructure? So going away from the traditional, we are going to Guyana to build the bridge across the river that is then not used by people in the village because they don't perceive a need of it, right? It's building infrastructure with community resources, community decision-making, and processes. And the last one, leaders, investing in community leaders, then really finding out who are the natural leaders, who are the appointed leaders, and making sure that we're all at the same table and that our role is listening, not so much leading. The community here at the bottom are the ones, people in the community are the ones who are deciding what their needs are, identifying what resources are available and which ones they need, right? Which strategies seem to make more sense and what those outcomes should be. And so how do we strengthen community philanthropy? If we're a community foundation, how do we continue to strengthen community philanthropy within our regions? Or if we're a funder, or if we're a local nonprofit, how can we also promote community philanthropy? And these are just a few examples of ideas that are out there in Canada. In Canada, they've been working on vital signs research for a long time, and it's a way of mapping their places, their communities or regions where they work, to really get a diagnostic of what are the demographics, what are differences between populations, and then not only doing the research, but then having what they call vital conversations after that. So inviting different sectors of the community together to talk about the results and to decide together what are the priorities here? Where do we need to move forward? And it's possible we support at CCA, at Connecting Communities in the Americas. We offer grants. We've just offered 7 foundations grants to do some mapping of these populations. But you can do it at a very local level. A nonprofit can do its own sort of mini mapping, right, of your community. And inviting the participants of your programs to partake in this decision-making. Impact investing with entrepreneurs or small businesses, participatory grant making. We're going to be offering a workshop on this because there was also a very high level of interest, and we want to look at different models of participatory grant making that are happening across the Americas. Giving circles, are growing. They're quite popular in the United States already, but they're really growing across Latin America and the Caribbean. Some of you have experience already with that. Strengthening community philanthropy through general support to nonprofit organizations. It's been in the conversation now for over a year of how important it is that funders allow their funding to be used in a more flexible manner so that nonprofits can do what they know they need to do. And for educational growth. So one document that I looked at took a very interesting look at how to support education in their community. And they decided that rather than providing scholarships, they were going to focus on making sure that every family had internet access and the technology, the maintenance for the technology, and the training of how to use the technology in their community. And so it's not saying that scholarships are bad, but it might be taking a program and looking at what will have the longest lasting effects for the general community or the community as a whole. So this is where we end up, and we're going to go into breakout sessions again too, so that you have plenty of time to talk to each other. What do you think at this point? What could you and your organization do to strengthen community assets, community capacity, and community trust, even more than you're already doing? Because we all do some of this, right? But as you've listened and talked to people today, what can you share with each other? Most of you are in groups with people from other countries too. And you might find that things are done a little bit differently. So let's go back into those groups, and I'll give you a little bit longer time today. We'll have until 25 past the hour. So where do we go from here, right? It's one thing that I think about with connecting communities in the Americas is how, what would be this definition of community philanthropy that we should adopt as an initiative? And, maybe that's something for each of your organizations you can think about and talk with staff, your colleagues at the organization. What does this mean, community philanthropy, for us? Are we promoting assets? How can we do that better? Capacity. How can we build trust? Who haven't we built trust with yet, right? And how do we get there? The idea with connecting communities in the Americas is learning how to do that together. And so building relationships across countries and across organizations so that we can learn from each other.
Regarding grant making, in my view, it is very important to be thinking about building community capacity and building trust and capacity, because when you give money to someone else and say, here, do something with it, you're trusting, and you help build capacity of that group or that organization. But sometimes a community foundation, particularly if it needs to, if it's early on, they need to prove that, look, we can do something. We're not going to, we can create impact with your money. Then they might need to operate a program or two for a little while just to build the communities and donors' trust in it. Or sometimes if there's a sustainability issue. In my view, okay, that's okay. But if we think of this as an organism that's going to last over the long term, over decades, over, right now, the oldest community foundation is 106 years old, then hopefully over time, you will be doing less operating yourselves and much more turning over funds, being that the segundo piso, to be empowering others by giving them what resources you could collect to be doing the work. So I hope that helps.